It's Garage Quest, the least watched show about Dungeons and Dragons on YouTube. And today we're talking about where to get your inspiration for campaigns.
This one is a viewer request.
That's right.
And two.
Hello and welcome to Garage Quest, a show about Dungeons and Dragons that takes place in a garage. I'm your host, May McDonough, and with me as always is my co-host, Rusty. And today we're talking about where to get inspiration from for your D&D campaigns. This came to us by request from a subscriber, and we fulfill requests 100% of the time.
1 out of 1?
So far, that ain't bad.
Yeah.
So let's get right to it. Rusty, where's a good place to start for getting inspiration for a campaign?
Well, I think the most obvious is movies.
Yeah.
It's like the most popularly consumed form of fictional media. And it pretty much has all of the elements of a good RPG session baked into the cake. You know, you've got, it's about the same amount of time that you're going to be spending in a session.
Relatively.
Yeah, you've got, similar number of characters and encounters and, plot twists.
Yeah.
It's a great place to start.
How would you go about taking a movie that you like and incorporating it somehow into your campaign?
Well, I think there's a couple of obvious places to start, and I wouldn't start there, and that would be like fantasy movies like The Lord of the Rings or
the obvious go-tos.
Yeah. I think that
You think they're a little too on the nose?
yeah, exactly. And the whole point of your RPG sessions should be to create your own stories, right? So everyone's already knows what part they're going to play in that story. So it's much better to start by re-skinning something that is not in your fantasy world.
Okay. Can you give us an example of a movie that isn't a fantasy, or a type of movie that isn't a fantasy that you could incorporate?
Oh, well, yeah, I think that the heist movie.
Yeah.
There are so many cool things that happen in a heist movie. There are skill challenges, there's social interaction, there's cons, there's little bits of combat. Things could always go wrong. There's like high risk, high reward kind of thing that really, with a little bit of imagination, can be taken from a modern bank heist or something like that and turning it into medieval high fantasy.
I like that idea because also you could, I think one of the goals of a heist is to manage to get through it, obtain whatever it is you're heisting, and do it with as little, with as much discretion as possible and as little trail behind you as possible. So as opposed to just slaughtering everything you come across, you have to you do a little more reconnaissance, and you have to be a little more clandestine. And
and just like in a movie like The Italian Job or Ocean's 11, everyone kind of has their own specific assignment in the overall mission that it's crucial that they follow through on their side of it in order for the whole machine to work.
Yeah, so then you might want to look at your characters and say, who's the best at lying? Who's the best at disguise? Who's, who can pick locks? Who's stealthy?
Like the A-Team,
Yeah.
But,
I like that.
Yeah, but a heist is just right off the top of my head. I think some other really good ones could be romantic comedies even.
Really?
Yeah.
How would you go about doing that?
Well, so the most important things that you're taking from these works of fiction, that they aren't the whole plot. Sure. It's really about the setup and the character development and motivation of the NPCs, right?
Yeah.
Because you're letting your characters decide the actual plot of the story.
Sure.
But
there has to be free will.
But it's just use these other works to create the setup and to flesh out the characters more.
So, in such a case, you're trying to convey essentially that you would suggest that we don't just determine as the DM the entire plot from the movie. You're saying just take smaller elements like NPCs out of the characters.
Yeah, like literally this is just off the top of my head, but if you were to look at Jim Carrey's The Mask.
Okay.
All right?
Haven't looked at it in a really long time.
Just think about your party getting somehow caught up in a village that they're traveling through, and they encounter this kind of really zany but hard to pin down kind of a NPC that's kind of like a loser or outcast, right? But then at night, there's this really crazy, cartoon faced guy that's, Casanova, starts getting the attention of this girl, but also getting the attention of the town guard or the crime boss that's in the area. And the NPCs get caught up in that. And there's a little bit of an element of trying to solve the mystery of who this masked man is. And then end up like having to help or hurt the one that's inspired by Jim Carrey's character. It could go either way. They could side with the town, or they could side with the NPC.
Yeah. So you mentioned doing a romantic comedy in that earlier, and that kind of reminded me actually of a movie I did recently completely steal from, and that was The Princess Bride.
The Prince Groom.
The Prince Groom, that's right. I like to do a little sex reversal there. So we were hired in our campaign. We had been hired to rescue the Prince Groom to be for the Princess Humperdinck. And it was a great movie. It functioned really well. It has adventure. It basically is D&D, that movie. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, there's an awful lot of
There's
of
magic,
that
there's necromancy, those encounters.
Yeah, if it weren't definitely not inspired by a D&D book,
yeah, you would think
I
it
would
was.
have guessed, yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to borrow a lot of elements from it without just sending my players on an exact parallel of the film. Because at some point, if you know as a player what's next, there's less intrigue.
Yeah.
There's less power to make choices on your own.
Well, it's just it defeats the purpose, like we were talking about. The goal of the game is to collectively tell the story, and if there's already a clear linear path for the story, it kind of breaks that.
Yeah, and what happens is, I think, when the players feel that there is rails for your game, a very strict path we're supposed to follow, if they feel that too much, they stop participating very much because they just feel like they're along for the ride or watching a movie.
Yeah. But that's why you put those very minor differences that had drastic consequences.
Right. So what I did was I had our adventurers, to begin with, on the trail of everything that happens in the movie. So when they arrive on the cliffs, there's no one there. And they had to basically track everybody in the film. And so they jump from point to point. They do go to the fire swamp. They do go to the Battle of Wits, etc. But at some point, the plot was flipped. After the fire swamp, I let them kind of choose where they were going and in what order. And I developed a dungeon for them. And the dungeon took up a significant amount of the quest, even though there is no real dungeon in Princess Bride. So that the next element could be more free will, and that kept the players more interested. And the dungeon is ultimately how they got up into the castle. And I think it was a success in borrowing a lot from a film without borrowing too much or putting the players in a position where they feel like there's not much choice for them, not much mystery. So that would be one tip I would say for inspiration is when you are being inspired by these things, films, for instance, borrow certain elements, but don't borrow the entire plot. Maybe it ends completely differently. Maybe it takes huge left turns throughout. Maybe it's only one small element of the film that you like. Now, that said, we can certainly borrow from other things. I recently made a campaign that was from 2 different writings by Jonathan Swift. Do you remember this one?
I think you'll have to remind me.
Okay, so I was really into Jonathan Swift when I was younger, and he wrote both Gulliver's Travels.
Oh, yeah.
And he wrote A Modest Proposal. And I thought it would be fun to combine the two. So our adventurers received a note that was, or they shot down a bird just showing off. And there was a note on it that was scribbled out. They couldn't read much, but it took them to the Swifteros Islands. We got there were 2 islands. And ultimately they discovered that on each island, one island had giants, one island had very small people, just like in Gulliver's Travels. And just inspired by Modest Proposal, each island was eating the other island's babies. And there was really no resolve to this story other than my adventurers finally figuring out what was going on. So
yeah, that was a heady encounter.
You think so?
Oh yeah, the twist of the what do they call it? Pedophagia?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pedophagia. It concerns me only mildly that you know what pedophagia is. So, well, perhaps it was too cerebral then, but I felt that it was a very successful adventure, and all I did was borrow 2 different stories' basic concepts and plug them together. What about you? Where else have you found inspiration?
Some obvious places are really a great place to start, which would be the other D&D books. You don't have to follow the campaign as written in a campaign book. You can just borrow the parts of the dungeon you like, or the encounters that you like, or the characters that you like, and weave them into your own narrative or your own setting. That's definitely a place I go to when I don't have a lot of time to prep for a session.
Yeah, and that's a really good rule just in general, is the books don't have to be taken from 100%. You can just borrow what you need. Now, some people may argue with me at some point that may not be D&D anymore, but I think we've borrowed a lot from campaigns already made in the books without actually playing those campaigns.
Yeah. I've even borrowed mechanics from other game platforms for individual sessions. Like, for example, in higher levels of gameplay, sometimes I like to have more of a army to army type battle, not just group melee, but full on, battlefield. And in that case, to use the traditional D&D combat mechanics is too tedious, to play all 50 characters. So many
characters,
or, per side, round
Any
per
mega
round.
horde is really difficult to DM.
Yeah, so that's where you start making platoon type actions, simultaneously controlling a whole group of characters, which, I've just basically ad hoc explained these rules that are very much just borrowed from Warhammer, on how to quickly and effectively make tactical movements for large numbers of characters.
And you just announce that to your players. Like, hey, now that we're in the encounter, I just want to let you know there are some ad hoc rules that I'm going to impose. This is how I'm going to move my characters. This is how they're going to take damage. And is everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
And we've had instances, I think my brother recently DM'd and he did that, and at some point you questioned how he was doing it. You weren't sure about it. So that happens.
It does. It definitely
That
does. I
happens.
was very embarrassed by that after the fact because I realized I was making a stink where
Were
it
you
wasn't
backseat
affecting.
DMing?
I was backseat DMing. I definitely was.
Oh,
I
Lord.
got really hung up on the way that he was mathematically modeling one very very narrow
Yeah.
incident.
You know what though? You, me, many D&D players are people who can get hung up on the tiniest grain of salt and really just jam it right into our eyes.
Yeah, but that's a product of
Overthinking.
yeah, to put it lightly, yeah.
Yeah. So DM tip, just roll with it. What is it? The rule of cool.
Yeah, rule of cool.
I like roll with it too because there's that double entendre there.
Yeah.
So let's talk.
Because you're taking ecstasy while playing D&D.
I am not taking ecstasy while playing D&D. I am sure some people have a great time doing that. I like less touching in D&D.
Imaginary touching.
Yeah. Let's just not touch.
No, yeah, not even your.
Don't
your
imagine
player
touching me.
Yeah.
So
You have very asexual player characters.
one might say they're asexual. A woman might say they're just not pandering to the male characters.
Yeah, all right.
So let's get back to resources. Let's talk about resources. So outside of just being inspired by films, books, pieces of fiction, I know that one place I like to go to be inspired is Red D&D It. It's the D&D Reddit thread. I love that thread because if I have an idea but I don't know how to work out the mechanics, I leave a post. Hey, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to build a fire swamp, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how exactly I want my players to move through this. And a lot of people will just say, try this, these are your mechanics. And I find that can really help propel me through planning my campaign.
Yeah.
I also, when I don't have ideas, I might just look up puzzles on Red D&D, find a puzzle I like, and take that, change some elements of it, and develop a plot around it.
Yeah. In addition to just other people's ideas and the community in general to help inspire you, resources like Xanathar's Guide to Everything, there are so many different tables and like random encounter generating things. You don't have to use you don't have to generate them randomly. You can just find inspiration by reading through and finding, oh, that's a really cool idea for a trap. And then string a couple of those really cool traps or monsters together and then kind of weave a storyline into it.
If you're not already DMing, if you're just a player, you certainly are free to go on doing that. But there is so much enrichment to the game when you try DMing. And I would hope that this video inspires you to go out and get some inspiration to give a hand at DMing, because in our group, everyone takes a turn DMing, and every DM does it a little differently. Every DM focuses on different things, and every DM takes their inspiration and interprets it into the game differently too. And it really just adds a lot of diversity and dynamic to your game.
Yeah, you start to learn from each other.
Yeah.
On how to be better DMs and better players.
Yeah. So go out and watch some movies. It doesn't
go forth
matter.
and quest.
Yes, go forth and quest. But before we wrap it up, I want to talk really quickly to Rusty about a new channel I hear you're building.
Within the next couple of weeks, I should be launching a little YouTube series and very much inspired by the cool times I've had here at the table with you for Garage Quest.
Super cool times.
Yeah. But I've got a lot more to say on the topic of world building and kind of starting the D&D hobby from scratch. And I'm starting with what I like to call a play-along campaign. So look for Taverns and Caverns. It's a really cheesy name for a channel, but well, we're gonna go with it. And yeah, so if you want to learn more about how to world build, entire campaigns, and if in particular if you're brand new to D&D, you might want to check it out soon, and we'll link that when appropriate.
Yeah, we've talked a little about it, and it definitely sounds like a really comprehensive channel to walk you through building campaigns. So I look forward to it. What's it called again?
Taverns and Caverns.
Taverns and Caverns.
Yeah.
So that's it. This has been Garage Quest, talking about inspiration for your campaigns. I'm May McDonough. This is Rusty. This has been Garage Quest on the Psychedelic Cherry. Please subscribe and leave a comment below. We love to hear from you, and let us know what you want us to talk about next time. See ya.